Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. We just had round 11 of the Formula 1, so we're now officially halfway through the season. It was a sprint weekend, which was the second of the year, and I thought we had some really great racing this weekend. Maybe not in the sprint, but definitely on the Grand Prix. So a few things to note. I think first of all, the racing has really improved this season. We can tell that by the new regulations. From the photo, you can see when we had the 5 cars going around and Lando did a double overtake on turn 3. It's absolutely brilliant. We've got some really great racing now, and the regulations are clearly working. Unfortunately, it wasn't all great news. There were some rumours that some people were getting abused in the grandstands, which is completely unacceptable. I think Formula 1 needs to do a better job of policing this. It's their responsibility, and every fan should be made to feel safe when they attend one of their events. It's the 1% that ruin it for everyone, and it looked like everyone else had a great weekend. But yeah, it's a shame to see these things are still happening in Formula 1. My moment of the weekend was Fernando Alonso telling off Yuki Tsunoda. He was overtaking him out of turn 3 and Tsunoda pushed him down, pushed him out onto the grass, and Tsunoda overtook him and shook his finger at Yuki. Yuki has responded on Instagram. I think he's taken it as a bit of a joke, and he'll probably learn not to push Alonso off again, otherwise he's going to get telling off. But yeah, this is really funny to see Fernando Alonso telling off Yuki Tsunoda whilst braking one-handed into turn 4. So like I said, the regulations are clearly working. From this you can see Austria actually had the second most amount of overtakes out of all the races so far this season. Now I don't think this tells the full story because, for example, Miami and Spain were 3rd and 4th, and I don't think those were great races. I think there was much better. As you can see, Great Britain Silverstone is 4th last, and I think that's still the race of the season. So overtakes don't mean everything. I think the stakes of an overtake make it more important. If it's been building for a few laps rather than just sort of a DRS overtake down the straight from a midfield competitor. But nonetheless, it was a great weekend, and yeah, we had overtakes all race. It seemed like there was an overtake every sort of lap. So having a quick look at this graphic from Formula Stats on Twitter, go give them a follow. They produce some really great content. Ferrari with Leclerc and Verstappen were clearly miles ahead of everyone else. Carlos Sainz was a bit off the pace, and the Mercedes was clearly the 3rd fastest car. But yeah, I don't think they were going to get near the 2 still. They're definitely catching, they're definitely closing the gap. I don't think this track was suited to Mercedes as much as it was last weekend at Silverstone, but it's still promising to see that they can pick up 3rd and 4th. Now the rest of the cars in midfield are extremely close. McLaren's and Alpine are going to have such a close fight this season. It's all about picking up those points between sort of P5 and P10 is what's going to make the difference at the end of the season. McLaren and Alpine are now tied on points, so there's obviously a really close battle for 4th. And I think Alpine are actually sort of leading that battle at the moment. Their car seems much quicker and much more consistent from weekend to weekend. We'll quickly go through my pre-race predictions, which I made before practice, so before any cars had a chance to run on track. And yeah, if you're not following me on Twitter, it's @Dan__OTG for Off the Grid. So first prediction, Max Verstappen gets maximum points across the whole weekend. So that was obviously in the sprint race, in the Grand Prix and fastest lap. It started off well. He won the sprint race and he was looking like he was going to win the Grand Prix. He also got the fastest lap. The only thing that he didn't get was P1, which went to Charles Leclerc in the end. It wasn't too far off, 1.5 seconds at the end, but yeah, Leclerc looked like the better driver on the day. No Ferrari podium on Sunday. It's just Leclerc on the podium. Has Sainz as an issue, which we'll get into. No McLaren points in the sprint race, which was the first one I got correct. Yeah, they both had a shock in qualifying and couldn't quite make up points in the sprint, but they did get points in the race. And I predicted there's going to be Ferrari engine drama, which there was when Sainz's engine just completely blew up and set the whole car on fire. So yeah, good prediction from me on that one. Not sure why I felt that was going to happen. I think it was just to do with the altitude and the fact they've been having so much drama recently. And also Kevin Magnussen said he had engine issues during the race, and he has a Ferrari power unit. So going into my race ratings, gave Verstappen an 8 out of 10, you gave him a 7. Extremely dominant weekend from Verstappen, as you would expect. He's always dominant in this track. But yeah, couldn't get the win. Just, I think, to do a little bit to do with strategy. It wasn't really his fault. We know he can deliver at this track. Ferrari seemed to have a little bit more pace, and I think their strategy, pitting a bit later, seemed to do the trick. Sergio Perez, I gave him a 6 out of 10. He obviously DNF'd during the race with the collision with George Russell. You gave him a 3. No, I think the collision was mostly probably Russell's fault, although I think Perez was sort of pushing it a bit and he could have probably backed out a little bit. But yeah, in the end he had that collision and took damage. Not a great weekend for Perez, dropped out the points massively, and he's now lost second in the driver standings to Leclerc. Yeah, I think he'll be extremely frustrated with that incident. Now, after having one of the fastest cars and being one of the best drivers on the grid, Charles Leclerc hasn't had a podium since Miami and hasn't won a race since back in Australia. So this is long overdue. You gave him a 9 out of 10, I also gave him a 9 out of 10. I think it's a really great drive. Didn't give him a 10 because I don't think he absolutely dominated. Didn't get pole and didn't win sprint, but yeah, I think it was a really solid drive from him and picked up a decent amount of points, which puts him back in the fight if he can keep this up. Carlos Sainz gave him a 7, you guys gave him an 8. He didn't have the pace that Leclerc had, which seems like it's a tale of this season, but he was running in decent points, and he probably would have got on the podium if it wasn't for that engine issue, which completely wasn't his fault, which put him out of the race, so extremely unlucky for Sainz. Lewis Hamilton making a great comeback after his mistakes in qualifying, got some paces back in the sprint and then managed to get on the podium again, which is 3 races in a row now. I think he's getting the new title of Mr. Consistent. He seems to have figured out this car, and even though the pace isn't there, he seems to be getting the most out of it. They didn't have as much pace as they did last weekend around Silverstone, but as I said before, I don't think this track is suited to them. But yeah, pretty solid weekend from Hamilton. Same sort of result for Russell as Hamilton. Obviously had the incident with Perez, which he got a 5-second penalty for, which I think was probably deserved. It was his fault. But yeah, I don't think he was ever going to beat Hamilton. He wasn't quicker than him on the day, but still decent to pick up 4th place. Landon Norris didn't seem to be getting along with his car at all in qualifying. I think he ended up qualifying 15th, and he's saying he was scared to press the brake pedal because it was just not working at all. Finished the race with a fairly decent amount of points for that McLaren, but I think McLaren needed to deliver a better car than they've got at the moment. They need to figure out what's going on. They said they're going for the strategy that Haas are doing, where they're not going to bring upgrades, they're going to try and understand the car. And if this is what Haas have done and they're getting into the points that they are, I'm sure this can work for McLaren. Better weekend for Daniel Ricciardo, but he still wasn't beating Lando Norris. And Norris even got the penalties for track limits, which Ricciardo didn't. Gave him a 6 out of 10, you guys gave him a 5. It wasn't a million miles off the pace. I think McLaren needs to focus on bringing a better package to the race, which Ricciardo can deliver. There was also some comments that Zach Brown said that Ricciardo needs to start matching Lando's level. Now, I agree with this, but I also think that Lando is clearly the favourite driver. He's the star boy, he's got the long-term contract, and I think they set this car up for Lando, which doesn't seem to help Daniel Ricciardo. I think they need to fix this car for Ricciardo. I think they need to sort of let him develop it how he wants, setup-wise, because he doesn't seem to be able to get anything out of it. He says there's not one thing in particular that he doesn't have. He's not scared to go into corners or anything like that. He just can't seem to sort of figure out where it's coming from, and this is what's happening every weekend. He said he just doesn't really know every weekend, which is quite concerning. I think Mercedes knew what the problem was. They had the porpoising, they had the no downforce, but if McLaren just said they're not really sure where this is coming from, it's quite a big concern for them, and I think they need to get on top of this as soon as possible. Brilliant weekend from Alonso. I gave him an 8 out of 10. And he's showing that this Alpine can probably challenge for 4th in the Constructors this season. Over the past sort of 3 or 4 races since Baku, they've really shot up the rankings, and El Plan is definitely working. Ocon, for me, is driver of the day. He might not be showing the sort of the raw pace, and he didn't get hardly any screen time or coverage, and I'm surprised the lack of votes he got for driver of the day, but getting the Alpine to 5th place I think deserves a mention. If you look at the Constructors, Ocon is the reason why Alpine are 4th, joined with McLaren, and he's been getting consistent points every single race weekend. It is extremely impressive, and he's definitely getting the majority of the points for Alpine at the moment. Another weekend to forget for Gasly. He got pinched at the start, which spun him round, and then he had that collision with Vettel and got a 5-second penalty. The pace wasn't there. The season's really not going well for AlphaTauri. Kind of feel for them, but yeah, I'm not sure why they can't figure out they clearly can't figure out this car, and both drivers seem to be operating at a similar level, which is at the bottom of the field. Yuki Tsunoda, I've given him a 4. After starting the season really strong, he's starting to sort of creep back bad habits and drop down. He gets frustrated at the back of the field and he just wants to push forward, which causes mistakes. When you have a better car, yes, you can fight for more positions, but you can also sort of be a lot more composed in your driving. So yeah, hard to judge Yuki Tsunoda, but I think with more time and a better car, he can show his real talent. Finishing 11th, just outside the points, I gave Bottas a 5 out of 10. And I think both Alfa Romeos had a relatively quiet weekend. Didn't really see much track coverage of them as they were fighting in the midfield. They seemed to have fixed some reliability issues and finished the race, which is good to see. But yeah, dropped off their pace a little bit since the start of the season, where they looked a lot stronger. Zhou Guanyu, it's brilliant to see him back racing just sort of 5 days after that big crash at Silverstone, but it wasn't a great weekend for him. Gave him a 3 out of 10. I thought it was pretty poor. Wasn't on Bottas's pace all weekend. And yeah, one of those sort of weekends to forget for Zhou. But it's understandable, he had a massive crash, and I'm sure this 2-week break will be good for him. Williams finally got to see their upgrade package that they had brought to Silverstone, but unfortunately Albon had that crash. But it seems like this upgrade package is really working. Although they've had some good finishes this season, that Williams looks comfortably sort of quicker in qualifying, and I think in the race they're going to have a car, if Latifi can sort of match Albon, which I don't think he will, but I think they'll be able to sort of fight the Aston Martins and Alfa Romeos a lot closer, and also the Alfa Tauris, and I think they could sort of pick off the bottom of the grid and get a few points, which would really help Williams with their development. Nicholas Latifi obviously wasn't running the upgrades, so it's hard to sort of tell his pace, but I gave him a 5 out of 10, you gave him a 2, which I thought was a bit harsh, but didn't have the upgrades and DNF'd. But I think they're bringing their upgrades package for both cars in Paul Ricard, so it will be interesting to see where he sort of sits in the standings then. I gave Vettel a 6 out of 10. He got quite unlucky with the incident with Albon, knocking him off the track, but this car clearly doesn't have the pace that it needs to fight for points. I think that's clear to see. They did sort of run quite high up into the points after their long stint on the hards. It was interesting to see they did really well when they brought that upgrade for the first time, and haven't really seemed to be able to match that pace. So I'm not sure if they're still struggling to understand what they brought or sort of maximise the upgrades or not. Not much to say on Stroll, finished 13th, so I gave him a 6 out of 10, you guys gave him a 3. Relatively sort of strong finish for that Aston Martin, as I think it's probably the 9th quickest car at the moment, but I can't see them really getting points anytime soon unless they sort of understand what's sort of holding that car back. What a weekend it was for Haas. Double points finish again after Silverstone, and also picking up a few points in the sprint race. Gave Kevin Magnussen an 8 out of 10, you gave him a 9. Really solid drive from him, and the Haas seems to be sort of really quick in straight lines. That's why a lot of their speed was coming from this weekend. And yeah, I think they'll just like to keep this form and keep pushing on to France. Mick Schumacher now, and your driver of the day, you gave him a 10 out of 10. I gave him a 9 out of 10, finishing 6th. I think a 9 sort of fair. He didn't have anything, it wasn't a sort of drive of the year or anything mental like that, but it was an extremely solid drive for Mick. Really good overtakes, and he had the pace on his teammate all weekend. He seemed really frustrated after the sprint race because I think they said he wasn't allowed to pass, so he clearly got that done in the race, and yeah, he seemed pretty happy with it. So finally we'll have a look at how the drivers' standings are. Max Verstappen is still on the lead, and yeah, a nice amount of points, 27, to keep his points tally going. Now Charles Leclerc has overtaken Sergio Perez after Perez's DNF, and 32 points for Charles Leclerc is massive, and that really helped. You can see that really closes the gap between him and Verstappen. Perez obviously not doing great, but still in 3rd place. Carlos Sainz also not scoring a massive amount of points due to the DNF. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton both picking up a really decent amount of points. They're just keeping in the race. If they can stay thereabouts, we're only halfway through the season, so if they can get a car that's sort of just as quick, or if not quicker, than the Ferrari or the Red Bull in the second half of the season, they've got all this points from a car that's not been that competitive, and the amount of points that Red Bull and Ferrari have dropped from having their quick but unreliable car is massive. Landon Norris is way off of the Mercedes, but he's doing a great job for that McLaren as expected. And yeah, Esteban Ocon getting 13 points this weekend, as I mentioned, absolutely brilliant. And I think he's got sort of at least 3/4 of the points, the total points that Alpine have got. Valtteri Bottas still doing quite well, but no points this weekend. Fernando Alonso just the 1 point, which he'll be disappointed about because he had such great pace this weekend, which has been the tail of his season so far. Great pace, but not great race results. Kevin Magnussen doing well, getting a decent amount of points. Daniel Ricciardo is not doing great, just an extra 2 points. He's miles off Lando. Gasly and Vettel, no points, and they're sitting in that sort of lower midfield battle. Mick Schumacher, 8 points this weekend, so he's doubled what his previous total was for the season. Yuki Tsunoda, no points, and everyone else, no more points for this weekend. So if you got this far, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. If you can consider liking and subscribing, it really helps me grow the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.